So when we encounter a story in the Bible that we've heard like a billion times, like who here has heard of the feeding of the 5,000? Raise your hands. Okay? There's a temptation to get bored with it. To look at it, be like, okay, I know God, with God's grace, abundance is everywhere. Just like there's tons of bread and fish. I get it. God can take the ordinary things and make them extraordinary, like bread and fish. I'll move on to the next. But this is a common mistake that Christians make when reading the Bible. A mistake that if we took our focus from the Bible away for a minute is easily seen. For example, let's take the play Hamlet, right? Who here knows what I'm talking about? Hamlet, y'all? Everyone? Okay, good. So Hamlet by Shakespeare or the Bard. If you were to go ahead and read Hamlet for the first time and you want to get the main themes of that play, what character should you focus on? That's an actual question. Hamlet, right? It's a cue in the name itself. You should focus in on Hamlet. And you're right. If you follow the story of Hamlet in the play Hamlet, you will get like the major theme, the big point, and all that. However, if every time you went back and read or saw Hamlet, all you ever did was think about Hamlet and never thought about any of the stuff going on around him, would there be things you'd miss? Yeah. There are whole doctors written about Ophelia out there, right? Because when you get into a story, if you just get caught in the catch and in the main theme, you miss out on a lot of richness and a lot of other points that may be going on around that primary theme. And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to go beyond bread and fish and talk about the other things going on in this story, a story we all know so well. So let's start at the beginning. So at the beginning of the story, Jesus is there, and he gets this horrible news. He learns that his cousin has been killed. Not just killed, he's been beheaded. Now, for those of you who don't know the backstory to this, let me walk you through what happened. In what has to be one of the cringier moments in the New Testament, Herod is hanging out with his buddies, and they're all drinking, and they're having a big party, and he turns to his daughter and says, "You should dance for my friends." Major cringe moment. Okay? And the daughter's like, "Really? That seems weird. I don't want to dance for your friends." And he's like, "You know what? I'll give you anything you want if you dance for your friends." Talk about a drunk promise, right? And he says this to his daughter, and his daughter's like, "Fine, I'll dance." So she dances, everyone has a good old time, but then comes the point where she's got to ask for this thing she wants. So she goes to her mom, and she's like, "Hey, Mom, what should I ask for? I don't know." And the mom, who has a whole bad history of John the Baptist, is like, the head of John the Baptist. So she goes back and tells her dad in front of all his friends, "What I want is the head of John the Baptist." Now her dad is a king. He's made a promise. If he goes back on it, his honor is damaged in front of all his friends and all his dignitary and all his court. It's going to cause him major problems. So without trial, without being accused of anything wrong, without having broken any laws, John the Baptist is beheaded. Now, it's bad enough that Jesus loses his cousin. That'd be hard on any of us, right? But John the Baptist isn't just any relative. You got to remember back to that Christmas Eve night where Mary and Joseph are searching for a place to stay to have their child. Can they find a place? No. Why can they not, in Joseph's hometown, find a place to stay? Because their families rejected them. Think about it. If you come from a small town and your families live there for generations and you need a place to stay and no one has room for you, someone's behind that, right? That ain't no accident. Which means growing up, he had his mom, he had his dad, and he had his cousin. That one cousin that always believed in him, that always loved him, that always really understood him. That one that he knew. The one that knew him. You might have that adult in your life. That adult when you were a teenager and you couldn't talk to your mom or dad. That adult you could go to. Maybe they're your cousin, maybe they're your uncle, maybe they're your grandparents, maybe they were a good friend. That's who he loses today. That's who is killed. today for Jesus. It's that level of grief. So what does he do? He leaves what he's doing, gets in a boat, floats across a lake very slowly. What is he doing? He's taking time to grieve. He's taking time to take care of himself. He's taking time towards that self-care that we have to when we ourselves run into the tragedies that haunt us in life. What is God making holy in that moment? The reality that you got to put the mask on yourself before you can put the mask on someone in need. That if you don't love yourself, it's hard to love others. If you can't show compassion to yourself, you cannot show it to others. If you cannot show mercy to yourself, you surely cannot show it to others. Self-care itself becomes holy in this story. Because when you ask, what did Jesus do? The question we should always be asking ourselves, what he did was when he hit that moment of grief, hit that moment of pain, hit that moment of hurt, he took care of himself. The world will tell us that that is weakness. The world will tell us that that is not being tough enough. The world will tell us that that is selfish, and the world is lying. Because for us as Christians, we know the reality, which is if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't care for others. Now, he spends who knows how long at that lake, because it's the morning when he gets in the boat, some point in which he gets out of the boat, we're quickly to evening, right? So some period of time he takes for himself. He finally floats that boat across the lake. He lands there, probably hoping to have more time to himself, but he looks out upon the crowd and he sees those who are sick. He sees those who are in need. He sees those who are hurting. And what his response is? Well, the Bible tells us it is compassion. It is the emotion of compassion. See, for so many, we've reduced what it means to be Christian to either what we think and believe or what we do. And well, what we think and we believe is part of it, and what we do is part of it. What we feel is also part of it. When we see suffering, is our initial response internally that of compassion? Or is it that of indifference? Is it that of empathy or that of hatred? Is it that of caring or that of apathy? See, part of our Christian calling is attuning our internal self even to the point of our feelings. That when we see the suffering of others, we are moved by compassion, moved by mercy, moved by forgiveness. That's one of the ways we know if we are in line, in harmony with God, with nature, with our neighbors, is how we feel when we see. For today he makes compassion holy itself. Now, those of you who are super astute, those of you who are caregivers, those of you who have been parents or grandparents, note a familiar problem that has just occurred to Jesus. Because we've made self-care holy. We've made compassion towards others holy. And you're probably thinking to yourself, man, I've totally been in that situation where what I really need is a nap, or what I really need is to power down, or what I really need is some time to myself. And then that's when the 3-year-old walks in and says, Dad, I don't feel well. Blah. Right? Or grandma, or grandpa, or uncle, or aunt, or teacher. And you have that same clash, that clash that Jesus has, compassion on one side, need to take care of yourself on the other. Now, the world will lie to us. The world will say there's a good and there's an evil, and there always is a good choice and a wrong choice, a right and a wrong, a good and evil. The world will always try to boil things down to this or that. There's whole books are called This or That. But what God reminds us of is that in this moment where you're trying to choose between the self-care of love of self and care of self and making sure that you can get up and care for others, and the pull of compassion by the Holy Spirit towards that call to help others, you have two good and holy choices. It's not a right versus a wrong. It's not a good versus a bad. You're caught between two holy things. It's like being caught between baptism and communion. You really can't make a wrong choice. You've already shown up to church either way. See, one of the things that God acknowledges in this moment is the world is not full of dualisms. The world is not full of just right and wrong. Sure, there are times you'll have a right or wrong scenario, but sometimes you get caught in two rights and sometimes you get caught in two wrongs. And the world is too easy to judge, too easy to Monday morning quarterback it. As we will note in the prayers here in a little bit, that we are remembering the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima this week. Many people will sit and pontificate about what Truman ought to have done. What was the right decision? What was the moral decision? To those people, I simply say, be grateful to God it wasn't your decision. Because you can't sit there and compare to what would be the perfect answer when there isn't perfect answers. I talk about this one as a moral thing in confirmation class. Because in this scenario, there's no great answer. Do you leave Imperial Japan to stand, who stood with the Nazis? Do you leave their army intact? Do you continue to bomb them? They tried that for nearly a year, killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. Are you going to kill millions more by bombing for the next 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years? Are you going to try a land invasion? Your generals tell you, rightfully so, that it will cost 1 million American lives and cost 100 million Japanese lives and expand the Soviet sphere of influence. There's no good decision. This is why we have grace. This is why we have mercy. This is why we have love. Because God realizes that sometimes we have a right and a wrong. Sometimes we have two rights, like in this story. Sometimes we got no good answers. See, Christianity isn't Pollyannish. Christianity is more real than the world itself. The world tries to boil things down simply, make it a right versus a wrong, a good versus an evil. We as Christians realize real life, so much more complicated. And that's why we lead with compassion, lead with mercy, lead with love, and lead with grace. Because those are things all of us need. Because thanks be to God, none of us is Harry Truman. We all have those moments. The moments where you have two goods to choose from and are anxious for no reason, but also the moments where there's no good answer. It's going to be messy. Jesus had that. Surely someone stood there, the disciples basically do, saying, seriously, dude, how'd you not think about lunch? As you go out this week, take a few minutes in your life and ask yourself, how are you doing at showing yourself love, showing yourself mercy, showing yourself grace, showing yourself compassion? Because if you cannot show those things to yourself, you cannot show it to others. If you come back and say, yeah, I'm pretty good at that for myself, then are you showing it to others? For you have to remember that the greatest commandment starts off with love your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. For we first must understand God's love, compassion, mercy, and grace before we can love our neighbor as we love ourselves with the same love, compassion, and grace. Amen.